Hello and welcome back to the Better Divorce podcast. If you know who I am, no further explanation, but if you don't, my name is Paulette Rigo. I am the CEO and founder of Better Divorce Academy and the author of #1 best-selling book, The Better Divorce Blueprint, and yes, the host of the Better Divorce podcast. Today, I am joined by Brynn Ungerleider, and that's Welsh if you didn't know. I was just in Wales. It's cold. She is the CEO director of Premier Nanny Network. And boy, do we have a deep, juicy episode for you today. If you have kids and you're thinking about getting divorced, you need a pad of paper. So listen up, grab your pad of paper and pen, and meet Brynn. Brynn, thank you for coming today and engaging in this conversation with me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and I hope that I can contribute value for all of your listeners that are thinking of getting divorced or trying to navigate divorce with their children.
Well, if you're anyone out there listening, like what I went through with kids and nannies, both Brynn and I can explain. So just a little bit of background of her. She's the CEO and director of Premier Nanny Network. She started babysitting so she could afford to buy CDs at the mall. If you don't know what a CD is, you probably should not be listening. And what began as a fun way to earn cash turned into a 20-plus year career in nannying and household management. So Brynn, let's start a little bit with why do you do this? Do you really just love kids that much? Do you love families? Do you love nannies? Like, why would you possibly want to do this? Because in my opinion, this is a stressful career.
You are correct. It is a very stressful career, and I have definitely been put through it on several occasions, but you hit it perfectly with I love children and I love helping families. And I think that the innocence that children provide in their ability to remain in the present is what kept me grounded through the decades I spent helping them and their families. And it just, to me, with all of the challenges that come in life, the rewards always outweigh every circumstance I've been in where it was a lot to take on. And I just am so grateful for all of the lives that I have been intertwined with. And I still hear from children today that I nannied years and years and years ago about their experiences working with me. And I still stay in touch with many of the families as well. And it's just a very heartwarming, intimate position for all of us that are nannies.
I have so many great memories of having nannies myself. When I first started thinking about having children many, many, many years ago, I had a weird job. I was a dance teacher, and dance teachers don't have Monday through Friday 9 to 5 jobs. I worked Tuesday 3:30 to 10:30, Wednesday 4 to 8:30, Friday from 3 to 7, and Saturdays 9 to 5. I don't know a dance teacher alive that does not teach on Saturdays. Now, that's not to mention rehearsals, dress rehearsals, performances, you name it. But that was the normal schedule. And when I had this baby and I had to find a way of somebody to take care of the baby when I either didn't bring the baby to the studio, which is great when they sleep, but she was crawling around and it actually got dangerous sometimes, like with little girls Shanae and PK turning and torgeting with this child crawling on the floor. I was like, the kid's going to get hurt here. And sometimes I'd have a babysitter come and watch her there. But let's just say it's so distracting because she would cry and then I'd want to go help with the baby. And then I'm trying to teach 32 girls how to do switch leaps. And it was crazy. So I started to look into daycare centers and they laughed at me when I said, oh, I need somebody like Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday afternoon, early evening, and Saturday. Well, the look on their face was not good. Not good. They laughed. So I thought, okay, well, I've got to either do a nanny or an au pair, right? Because I don't know what to do. So I'd never really babysat and didn't really know the options either. So I don't know where Tracy is living, but Tracy, if you ever hear this, you were our first live out nanny, and it was in 1992. And I love you, and you're the reason my daughter can read. So she was a preschool teacher, I can see her beautiful face, Tracy. And as soon as I interviewed her, I found her through an agency like yourself. I don't even know if Peggy Marshall is still around, and it's called Professional. It's in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Professional Sitters Network, something. And I called her crying, literally crying. I need somebody like immediately. And a second I met Tracy, it was love at first sight. We had her for a year and it was great. And then she up and got engaged and married. How dare her? So I hope all is well. And she probably has 9 kids of her own. So she was a preschool teacher. So she would teach preschool in the morning and get out at like what, 11, 11:30, 12. And then she was great. She'd have lunch. She'd come over to the house and spend those horrible hours with her while I was working. And then I would come home and the baby would be all bathed and in bed and all adorable. And I'd be like, oh, this is magic. And then of course we had the second and the third, and this podcast is not about my nanny nightmares, but I get it. You know, it's a very emotional thing to like hand your baby over to a stranger and say, I need your help. So if you are, you know, I personally think this episode is important. And when I learned of Brynn, and she'll tell you a little bit about her story going through divorce too. Apparently she found me in my podcast, reached back out to me, say a month or so ago to be a guest. And I said, yes, yes, yes. I've never done an episode about babysitters, nannies, or au pairs ever in 7 years. That's a problem. So I'm going to give you the mic now after everybody knows my kind of sordid story with how that started with the chaos of nannies. But Brynn, how can nannies be a key aspect to the success of marriages or relationships, or particularly during divorce? Shed some light on that, because I think there's a lot of confusion as to what the role of a nanny is, and maybe we could go through also what is the difference between an au pair and a nanny, because some people may or may not know that too. I didn't.
Mm-hmm. Those are all fantastic points. To touch on the au pair versus a nanny, an au pair typically comes over from another country, and you have a specific rate that you offer them because a lot of their experience is coming to live in our country and live with you in exchange for childcare. Whereas a nanny is someone that is here in, I could say, America. So we'll talk about that place in particular. But a nanny is someone that lives here, and they can either live with you, like you've mentioned, or they can live out and come by the house. And I think the big difference is that a nanny, if treated correctly and it's a fantastic relationship and pairing, they're going to be with you for years. So it's not like you typically, especially in my experience, owning a nanny agency, my main goal is to make sure whoever I pair you with is going to be with you until your children are grown, unless some circumstance comes up, marriage, death in the family. I really strive to create that consistency because that is where children thrive. In my experience, when we offer children consistency, respect, and a decent schedule that they are aware of, they absolutely thrive. And I had nannied for a couple of families that had been divorced and would spend a week at the dad's house and a week at the mom's house, and just having that common consistency between households through me being a neutral party for one particular family. The parents really were not having a healthy co-parenting relationship, and I saw a lot of that in their children because their children, as always, would open up to me, especially through play, and they would share their emotions and how frustrated they were. And so I could, with their permission, I would go to their parents and say, hey, so-and-so is really struggling with this dynamic. Like, what can we do to make it better? Here are some things that were brought to my attention. And just having that level of transparency from a nanny standpoint, I saw immediate effects in the changes from the parents of offering more for their children so they could be less in survival mode and more in just thriving mode, and able to kind of put their guards down and kind of just be who they wanted to be as little people and experience their world as a child, instead of having to take on these very big emotions of, my mom is really stressed out right now because my dad was really mean to her. and having to pick sides. We've seen studies, or I've definitely gone into a lot of research studies about the effects of that kind of dynamic between parents in the way children behave. And, if you're experiencing, if you're in divorce or are divorced and you're experiencing behavioral issues with your children, please reach out to me. I'd love to offer you a way to consider, consistency, reliability through professional care. And I think that the biggest piece of being a nanny is just being able to become part of the family and anticipating needs, and then also being an extra set of hands. The effects I've seen, from working for career driven women or dual income households, of just having the family or the parents come home and the house is put together, the laundry's done, dinner's on the stove, the kids are ready to eat dinner with you, the table is set. In my math, you get back roughly 60 hours of your week by working with a nanny, because they're handling all those tasks that you don't need to be doing. You can focus on the tasks that are only from you, that are only available by you, which is being a parent.
Mhm. Yes, I'm reminiscing as you're chatting about that. The extra set of hands was huge.
Yes.
Because I had nannies over a 12-year period, from when the first child was born to the third child being of school age, right? That
Mm-hmm.
is typically, I find a decade is about, depending on the span,
Mm-hmm.
um, and your work situation too. The longest we had one was 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and she oscillated between live in and live out. And the others, 6 months to a year. Man, when you said I would love, when you said the objective is to have one for the entire duration of the children's lives, that would have been incredible. I don't know if I
Mm-hmm.
had a streak of bad luck. I think the hours had a lot to do with it, because I I was I was in need of somebody with unique hours, and also my spouse had a very demanding hours with his job. He pretty much had a beeper and came and went like the wind, so I couldn't really rely on him. Even if he was there, he might have had to leave at a moment's notice. So it was a very unique situation based on my dance teacher hours, late afternoon and evenings and Saturday, and also his kind of being on call, right? Whereas if it's
Absolutely.
two separate people and they're, maybe 8 a.m. to 4, 5, 6 p.m., kind of like the normal 9 to 5 corporate thing, that might be a little bit more easier to fill, right? And we did have au pairs that were supposedly from the United States. I mean, I don't know why they were called au pairs, even though they were from Utah
Mm-hmm.
and Colorado. There's Brynn,
Mm-hmm.
Colorado, and I forget exactly where the other places they lived, but I found that the big difference was the live in versus the live out, right? So because
Yes.
the live ins, as you mentioned, Brynn, do sort of become a part of the family. Laundry, meals, shopping. We would go on to a, I don't know, a party or a gathering, and I always included them in everything we
Mm-hmm.
did. I felt as if they were a part of the family. I think some of them loved that, and some of them hated it. They're like,
Yeah.
talk to me when I'm not working. And I was like, but I feel like it's rude. So
Of
it
course.
does take a little while, right, to find that balance between the dynamics of the parents and the children and the personality and demeanor of the nanny, as to how included they want to be and how unincluded they want to be. Not that they're disregarded, but that must take a little time. You did mention the living in two separate households, right? Where in a divorce situation, the co-parenting is there, in some words, an ombudsman or a go-between, right? Or a buffer
Yes.
between those two sets of rules. And I do speak a lot in the work I do, particularly in mediation with couples, about co-parenting success versus parallel parenting and counter parenting. Whereas that nanny can be the rhyme of reason or the voice of reason for the children, when perhaps mom and dad have different sets of rules that can be
Mm-hmm.
confusing. Mealtime, homework, bedtime, friends, sleepover, travel, discipline, cell phones. I could go on for hours about that. But,
Yes.
if you're living in a household with two sets of rules, Brynn, how do these kids survive? It's very challenging in a
It's
divorce
so hard.
situation. And I could see where the nanny could be that comfort zone for them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So your parents were divorced,
Yes.
and you had a divorce yourself.
Yes.
So she understands what we're talking about. So, um,
Absolutely.
yeah, let's talk a little bit about those effects of divorce on children, both from personal experience as a child of divorce and from working with families who are divorced. So, what do you see? Because this is a question I am asked a lot.
Mhm.
I don't want to destroy my children. We're staying together for the children. Like, I want to have the least amount of effect on the children. And what is it that you see as a professional in this world are the effects of divorce on children?
That is such a phenomenal question. And it's something that I'm also asked quite often is how to make this experience easy for the children to be in transition. And, from my personal experience and my parents' divorce, it was horrific. It's been 23 years and they still do not speak to one another. And so from a young age, I was 14 when they divorced, I had to pick sides. And, each parent in full respect, was dealing with so many emotions, so many changes. My dad moved from North Carolina, where I'm from, all the way to Portland, Oregon. So when I went to go live with him, I had to travel across the country several times a year to go visit my mom. And it just was so much turmoil. And, in the families that I've nannied for and the children that I've, come across in my adventures as a nanny and a household manager, the one common denominator is always that mess up in their schedule. And for an example, for a family I nannied for, it was like the kids would go to the dad's house and it was just play and fun and there was no schedule and they would stay up late, and it kind of rocked their systems a bit. Even though it was really fun for them and they were getting that time and dedication from their dad, by the time they went back to their mom's house, they were exhausted, they were depleted, they were having issues with their behavior because of the lack of schedule. And so the mom, she would have to spend her time with the kids, getting them back to homeostasis, back on schedule, getting into a point where they were, back to thriving. And then boom, they'd go back to their dad's house. So it was a constant rigmarole of shifting that routine for them. That is so important for every child out there. And it's great to have spontaneous adventures and make those changes in a healthy, secure way. But when you're constantly throwing them into a situation without a schedule at one family's house or one parent's house, and then back into, like you mentioned, those two sets of rules, it takes such a toll on their brains, on their emotions, on their mental capacities. And, from my firsthand experience, in that situation, I had to kind of be there for the parents and go, hey guys, just from my point of view as a completely neutral party, love your children, love working for you, these are some changes that I would suggest you make, because it's just taking such an emotional toll on your children. And at the time, their son was actively, acting out at school. He was hitting his classmates. He wasn't listening. He was being disruptive. And, once I spoke up and, bridged that gap of my personal boundaries of don't get involved, don't get involved. Once I spoke up and I became an advocate for the children, they were able to tweak some things and how they were co-parenting. And they, looking back on it, I'm so grateful that they listened and they saw what I had offered in terms of my, my standpoint. And once they made some tweaks and the dad kind of pulled it in a little and was like, okay, we should probably figure out some sort of schedule. Once that happened, their son, it was like overnight, he just clicked, and he, became so much more invested in his school, his curriculum. He became a better classmate and a better friend, and he became more considerate to his friends too. And it's just, that's just one example of many in my experience of doing this for over 20 years of just, if you can find a way to offer that consistency and that reliability between both households and create that bridge, you're really setting your kids up for success. And the less that these children are in survival mode, the happier and more well off they'll be as they venture into adulthood. And they're not going to spend For myself, speaking from experience, once I got out of the house and was living on my own, I was still in full blown survival mode, and just my nervous system was wrecked. I really didn't operate from a place of any self love, self confidence. None of that stuff existed for me. So, that's a lot of the reason and a lot of my mission of why I do what I do, especially to help divorced parents, is let's create an environment for your children that allows them to thrive so that they're not stuck in this, well, which parent do I choose today? Which household am I comfortable in? Where can I be myself and not disrupt my parents? Or, you know, I can see that my mom is really stressed out and she's very mad at my dad right now. So I don't want to be in her wrath. I don't want to be in her way. And these are things that, are really devastating for children of any age to experience. So whatever we can do to kind of button that down and create more homeostasis and more respect between households is truly so monumental in the development of your children.
Yes, and you're talking a lot about the ideal situations in divorce, because the court is
Yes.
predominantly looking for you to parent, even
Mm-hmm.
though you're divorcing. So what does that mean? When you have a child and you're married, there's going to be a little bit of a difference of opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
The kids should go to bed at 9. The kids should go to bed at 9:30. Whatever. But you work it out. But now
Yes.
you have two sets of households, and if you don't communicate well, and I'm just using bedtime as a
Great example.
thread, it's very difficult if you're not communicating about, hey, what time do you think they should go to bed? Because when they go to bed at whatever time, they're a mess the next day and they don't do well in school and they talk back and they, whatever they do. But if they go to bed at this time, then you know what? They're, calm and thriving and whatever. But if you don't have that for many reasons in divorce, not everybody has that, it slips into this world of don't, what I do at my house is my damn business. And what you do
Mm-hmm.
at your house is none of my business. I don't even want to know about it. But now from the child's point of view, they are being tug of war, right?
Yes.
I wanted to do everything to eliminate that. And of course, my children were 11, 13, and 15. So, which is the poster child worst time for teenagers. So,
Yes.
and also because they were then turning into like 12, 13 to 17, and they had cars and licenses, and we only lived 8 miles from each other, and they could go back and forth any time they pleased, which also was not good because then they could, hey, I'm going to go hang out with dad. I'm going to go hang out with mom. And neither of us knew where the heck they really were. So it gets tricky. But you touch on the topic of, and that's just called parenting teenagers. That has nothing to do with divorce. So you'll do that even if you are happily married. So,
Yes.
well, if you don't have teenagers or haven't raised them, then call me. But you touch on the confidentiality versus the privacy issue a little bit. So when you have two households in divorce, the children need to not feel like, don't tell dad I told you this. Don't
Yes.
tell mom I told you this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to immediately go, oh, well, I better tell daddy or mommy because they said not to say that. Even if they're 4, they do,
Yes.
they hear that, right? And if they're 17, trust me, they're going to say something. So, and how do you as the professional nanny, housekeeper, au pair, whatever label we want to use, honor that confidentiality? Because you're going to be privy
Oh, yes.
to what goes on, the mail, the conversations, what they're eating, when they go to bed, if they're smoking cigarettes or smoking weed or whatever the heck they're doing. If they're
Mm-hmm.
teenagers, hopefully they're not little children. But, you're going to be aware of these, like you're going to hear them, or see them texting 24/7. And it now puts you in the situation of, how do I honor the confidentiality, but yet still not put the children in danger, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would think that would be some specific training or, oh gosh, a skill set of the professional in that world. It's hard. And also the privacy where each household deserves and is entitled to having a private world, particularly if the divorce is said and done and now they're either remarried or dating or whatever their situation is. It's a tough world there. So as a professional, what do you say to these professionals when they are ever put into a situation? And do any of them ever come to you like, help, Brynn, I don't know what to do here. This is awful.
Oh, absolutely. Nannies, anybody that I talk to that I help pair with a family, I tell them, like, here's my cell number. Call me, text me. I do go to bed early. So if you have something come up late at night, like, you're not going to hear from me until the next morning. But, I think that the biggest piece here that I teach to all of my caregivers, and I am putting together a training program, it's very much in its infancy stages, but I am putting together a program for nannies to kind of, I do touch on the behavioral development of children and where they are at different facets of their life, depending on their age. But more or less, I focus more on the emotional development in those pieces, and maybe the sociology aspect and psychology aspect of growing, and how to kind of navigate these very intimate, very, like you said, confidential situations. And I think the biggest thing, especially in my experience and what I tell my caregivers, is respect. Offer respect. Children respond so well to respect. It's insane. And so in one particular circumstance, I had a little girl confide in me. I think she was about 6 at the time, about some feelings that she was having, and she didn't really know how to process them. And we were doing play, and, again, playing with your kids. If you want to figure out what's going on with them, get on the floor, play with them. They will open up to you in a heartbeat. So we were playing, I think it was Barbies or something, and there was a situation that she was acting out with her Barbies that really opened my eyes up to how she was experiencing the divorce between her parents and how stressed out she was of just like the fighting between the Barbies and everything. And so we had a moment together where she acted out this scenario, and we kind of stopped, and I was like, hey, are you doing okay with everything? Like, how are you? And at first she was kind of thrown off by my directness and just kind of like, well, why are you asking me? Like, I thought we were playing. And then, a couple minutes later, she kind of was just like, I just feel confused over what I'm supposed to be doing in a 6-year-old kind of conversation of like, who am I supposed to love? And who am I supposed to be supporting? And I remember just kind of talking with her for, a little bit and just offering her that respect. And, I remember looking at her and going, is it okay if I maybe talk to your parents about this? And it's okay for you to say no, but it would mean a lot to me if I could open up and tell your parents about maybe some of the things we talked about today to see if we can find a way to make things better and, create a better atmosphere, create more fun. It seems like you're very sad. Maybe if we talk to your parents, we can make things a little bit more fun for you. And at first she was really reluctant. But I could tell, and it still rings true to this day, she really, those wheels were turning, and she was like, this Brynn is talking to me like I'm an adult, like I get to make the decision here. And just seeing those little wheels turn and that thought process. And she was like, yeah, I do want to talk to them. Like, I would like to do this. And she felt, I think in the moment, she felt so grown up and so, ready to just communicate what she was thinking and feeling. And so at first I always offer that respect, and I always ask for their blessing of like, hey, I notice this is really bothering you. Is it okay if I bring it up with your parents? And, sometimes kids say no, like, I don't want them to know. And we kind of continue until I, can find space to ask again if it continues to come up. And I remember talking to her parents about it, and, they responded really well. And they're like, really? She told you this? I was like, well, yeah, when you play with your kids and you're very present with them, like, they're going to tell you everything, or they're going to act it out in whatever stories they're putting together with their Barbies or their G.I. Joes or whatever. And, I always tell that to parents too, just, turn off the screens, sit at the dinner table, connect with your kids, ask them who they sat with at lunch or anything like that. If you're in separate homes, still make that time and space to really be present. And I think that circles back to nannies in general. What we do and the work we offer allows every single parent out there to have more time to be present with their kids, period. We are handling all of these logistical things that you don't really need to be doing so that you can do the one thing that we can't do, which is be present with your children, bond with them, and strengthen those relationships. So next time, that little girl will feel comfortable enough to go and go, hey, mom, these are some things that I would like to talk to you about. And, it really can facilitate the difference, especially as they grow into teenagers, on that topic of creating that common ground for them to want to come speak to you because of you offering that level of respect to them. It is such a big piece of everything that I've learned in my journey.
Yeah, I one of the greatest blessings was to be able to what I call divide and conquer, because I could
Mm-hmm.
take child A and take child A and spend time with child
Yes.
A on their likes and hobbies and passions and goals and aspirations,
Yes.
while the nanny or housekeeper was with the child B, because either they were sleeping or they were in school or they needed to be at another location, right? You can only cut
Yes.
yourself in half so much. So, sometimes it was a matter of like, okay, I'll take this one here and you take that one there. And once you have two, three, or more, it does take, you're in the car most of the time. And
Yes.
one of the most beneficial times where the children would share from, oh, probably overshare, was in the car, because
Mm-hmm.
there was no eye contact, but they still felt seen and heard, validated, whether it was the music I wanted to play, or, mommy, drive crazy or go faster. They felt like we could have this conversation, and especially if we were going up to New Hampshire, I would take them skiing, or we'd go to a hockey game, or we were going to sports a lot, or I was driving back and forth to teach ballet with my daughter a lot. And we would spend so much time in the car, and we would just talk and talk and talk. That was the time I felt that we could really bond a lot. So, instead of
Yes.
just, yeah, like you said, checking out, that was my favorite time, where I felt
Yes.
that they could listen. And there's really just a few messages to children, particularly when you mentioned, Brynn, so beautifully, about having them feel respected. In
Yes.
my book, Better Divorce Blueprint, on page 51, I list the 6 things that children need to know. And there's only 6. And as soon as the parents start giving details that are like that privacy confidentiality things, you're going into a world that is being disrespectful for the child, because the child is 50% parent A and 50% parent B. And if parent A says negative things about parent B, then they feel 50% bad. And if B says bad
Yes.
things about A, then that they feel 50% bad. And if they're both saying horrible things about each other, well, guess what? Your kid now feels 100% bad. And it
Yes.
does no good to talk bad about the other person. Now, we all mess up and do it. So slap yourself on the wrist, start over, and do that. But you are and always will be loved by mom and dad. You are and will continue to be safe. You are not to blame for anything. For any of this. Divorce is about blame, not about, sorry, divorce is about change, not about blame. And mom
Yes.
and dad will always be your mom and dad. And lastly, everything is going to be okay. And if you can just reiterate those simple, simple messages, it
Oh,
will help tremendously.
love those.
I want to go a little bit into cost
Sure.
analysis, return on investment. I do often hear, I can never afford that. It's too expensive.
Yes.
So, and we touched a little bit on the tasks. So let's go on the tasks. What are the tasks that are appropriate for people to ask a nanny or au pair to do? What is not appropriate? Or maybe we could just say that what's appropriate, or I'll let your expertise go on that. And then how do you explain the cost analysis and the ROI? Because now a national average, I don't know. Is it hourly? Is it salary? That would be a whole nother discussion. But those are the 2 things that I find people ask me. What do they
Hmm.
do and how much do they cost?
That is such an important thing. And I hear about this a lot too from the parents that I speak with. Because, of course, people have this myth set in their minds that nannies are only for the rich. And that is such a myth. I have nannied for people of every tax bracket, from, parents that are both working and just making it by, to, billionaires where their great, 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 great grandchildren will never have to work a day in their life. And I think that in order to look at the cost analysis and the return on investment, you really have to kind of dive deep into the benefits that you're receiving from your nanny. like you mentioned, having two children, your nanny can take one and spend time with them one-on-one, so you can go spend one-on-one time with your child. And what kind of price can you put on one-on-one time with your child? How much can you put on that, and the bonding and the strengthening of that relationship? To me, that is absolutely priceless, because I think back to my parents when they were together, and just throwing the ball with my dad in the front yard still to this day is one of my favorite memories. How much did that cost him? Just time, right? So when I do return on investment for nannies, I really look more into the time that you're spending with your children, that the nanny is removing from your plate. So as I mentioned before, you know, we could kind of get into the tasks a little bit. Those tasks really come down to you. And I always tell parents to please be completely open and transparent about all the things you want to have done. If you want your nanny to do laundry, tell me you want your nanny to do laundry. If you want your nanny to do meal prepping, tell me. If you want them to be a chauffeur, if you want them to run errands, if you want them to create a menu and go grocery shopping and execute that menu plan, tell me. Because all we're doing is setting you up for success. If you are not open and transparent with me about the tasks you would like for your nanny, your household manager to perform, you're going to be set up for failure, because you're going to have a nanny paired with you that thinks she's doing one part of a job, and then you're going to add those other details on later without an increase in pay. You're not going to keep that nanny happy, and you're not going to retain proper professional talent. So anybody out there listening that wants to talk to me about getting a nanny, put together your dream list. What are the tasks in your home that you don't want to spend time doing, that you'd rather take that time and allocate it to being with your children? So some simple tasks would be laundry, meal prep. One thing that's really big for me in my experience is that transitional management after school. How many of you out there are enjoying doing homework with your children? I would say probably very few of you. Nannies, especially in my experience, a lot of us have a lot of early childhood background, training and professional abilities. A lot of teachers are leaving the teaching workforce to become nannies. And in that sense, and, with that being said, they love homework time. They would be happy to do homework time. And you're getting a tutor in a nanny in a lot of cases. So it's kind of creating a lot of opportunity to remove those hours from your plate and allocate them toward more beneficial pieces of developing or strengthening the relationship you have with your children. So if your nanny is taking over laundry, meal prep, dinner, tidying the household, chauffeuring, running errands, you just created 50 extra hours in your week to spend with your children. What price would you put on that? A lot of parents would say that that's absolutely priceless.
You'd have
now
to
to come
spreadsheet for that.
Yes. So if you were to come down to it, I've done both positions where I've worked hourly and I've worked salary. And either way, again, it has to come from that space of transparency. As long as you're open and clear with your nanny about your payment expectations and what they will be receiving. We all have lives. We all have to pay our bills. Nobody really wants to work for free. And just kind of creating that space that's comfortable for you to make this investment. And, I had a mom a couple weeks ago I was talking with, and she's like, honestly, if I just stop going to Starbucks every week, I can easily afford a nanny to come over for 3 to 4 hours a day for 5 days a week. I'm like, yes, if you just start, adjusting your budget, your spreadsheet, and where you're putting your money right now, you can easily afford a nanny. And, so there's that transitional management I touched on a little bit earlier. You could have a nanny come by just for those, hours after school. They pick your kids up after school, they take them home, they do the snack, and they handle homework, so that by the time you're invested in hanging out with them, you're not struggling at the dinner table to do homework, and you're not struggling with the snack and all the things that are happening after school. And the nanny can get their backpacks ready for the next day. They can pack their lunches for the next day, clean out the lunch boxes from that day. All of these things that are so mundane that you really don't need to be doing. You could be focusing your time on sitting down and reading with your kid, or maybe there is a project that you want to help them with. Maybe they're working on a science project and you'd like to allocate the time instead of, struggling with math homework and English to just focus with them on that science project. Or the nanny can handle kid 1, kid 2, and you take kid 3 to go get those soccer cleats that they've outgrown and have that one-on-one time with them. And so the nationwide standard for pay is about $25 an hour, roughly. Right. It depends on where you are located, and it depends on the cost of living, of course. Where I am here, just outside of Aspen, Colorado, I don't leave the house for anything close to $25 an hour. Salary expectations, I've seen anywhere from, $55,000 a year with PTO to upwards of $200,000 a year, depending on what your family is really trying to create. And, a lot of that higher salary range really shifts into that household management, where
Right.
you probably have a couple other people on staff. You may have another nanny, you may have a chef, you may have a chauffeur, those kinds of households. But when it comes down to that return on investment, it really just, sit with it in your mind of what would you give to have 50 extra hours a week to dedicate to being present with your children? And what price would you put on that?
Yeah. Well, for me, it wasn't that I didn't want to do my children's homework with them. Sometimes I couldn't do my children's
Yes.
homework with them, even though I'm college education and have college educated, although you wouldn't know
Mm-hmm.
from me speaking right now. But I would look at the math sometime and go, wait,
Oh,
what
yes.
is this? I didn't
Yes.
learn how to multiply and divide like this. I have no, what are they talking about?
Mm-hmm.
There would be some projects that would just be like, you're kidding me. This is insane. Anyway, it all works out in the end. But it was nice to have that additional, I'm going to say, expert in managing, um, just like you said, the household daily tasks, right? From that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a very neat OCD, tidying, neat person. When I was interviewing people, they'd come in and they'd go, "Wait, do you have a housekeeper?" And I did have somebody come once a week or once a month, depending on the situation. I'm like, "No, I just keep the house clean all the time. Like, this is just how I am." But there are other households that are much more relaxed, like there
Yes.
are toys everywhere. Maybe it's not so neat. So I also find finding the right match to the right personality of the person, because if you're a neatnik and you hire someone that's not a neatnik, it could be a clash, or vice versa. If you're kind
Mm-hmm.
of a laissez-faire, hands-off kind of, relaxed parent, and your nanny is sort of like, "What's going on here? How come there's order?" You're like,
Yes.
"Why are the nannies yelling at me?" So, it is important, right, that you match that. And this is just from my 12 years of experience speaking. So, um,
Mm-hmm.
it is such a wonderful conversation. I really do see the value, even if you really just work with somebody for a short period of time to get you through the divorce, and you look
Mm-hmm.
at your situation, maybe having somebody come in the late afternoon, early evening to help with homework, carpooling, sports, errands, dinner time, and if they're younger children, bedtime. That was one of my dilemmas. Was you've got a baby that wants to go to bed, but you've got a 5 or 6 year old who's like wanting to play football in the backyard, and you're like torn between, what do I do? You got to strap this one here and put this one under your armpit and drag this one here. It's very difficult to be three people at the same time, and you do
Yes.
end up, as they say, it takes an army, or it takes a village to to divorce gracefully, with multiple children. If both parents are also not co-parenting well, that makes it even more challenging. So
Yes.
I also want to mention too that Brynn does household managers and elder care for aging grandparents, because that can also be a problem when you're divorcing and you have the responsibility not of just children, but an elderly parent. And now you're really dividing up your time, energy, and finances between the younger responsibility and the older responsibility. It might be that you need more help with the older uh,
Mm-hmm.
responsibility than the younger, or vice versa. Or that might change based on the day, and going to medical appointments and all those other type of tasks that you need to help. So if you're listening and you're thinking about, man, would it be great to have an extra set of hands, I really encourage you to reach out to her. Premier Nanny Network. What is the best way for people to learn more about you, follow you, et cetera, Brynn?
It's a great question. You're all welcome to go to my website, premiernannynetwork.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook. I do my best to put out an informational blog every week just to kind of continue the education and development of what we do. And then also, I just submitted and created a resources page as well for those of you that are listening that may not have the funds to hire a nanny right now, I've started creating some other resources that are a little bit more cost effective, because at the end of the day, it's all about making sure our children are thriving. And so whatever I can do to help any of you, even if you just want to call and chat about what you have going on, contact me. You're also welcome to email me, premiernannynetwork@gmail.com. And again, I am here, special needs, elder care, mother's helpers, household management, full-time nanny, part-time nanny, whatever you need. Let's make sure your children are put first.
Beautiful. And I also want to recommend that if you are a mom and you love children and playing and errands and laundry and education and all those other things that we do as moms, as women, I'm being sexist, but that's okay. Don't mean to offend any of you dads out there that dig that stuff, but stereotypically, but if you are and you're looking for a career, reach out to her. It's
Yes.
a low-paying career. It's everybody in every state needs help raising a family, and there are positions out there for the skills that you have. So
Yes.
why not turn your passion, your skills, and your resume into a career, particularly if your children are in high school or college and you are like, I don't know, what do I do with my time? Well,
Such a good point.
I just think you have a career heading you. So that's my suggestion, and everybody needs help. And if you are an experienced mom, well, you don't really need a lot more of a resume.
True. It's such a good point. Yes.
It's important. I think some of my best nannies weren't the 21-year-olds. They were the women that were a little bit older, a little
Yes.
calmer, a little more wise, a little more grounded. Although
Absolutely.
some of them are a little curmudgeony too.
Well, we're all different, aren't we? We're all very unique.
Ways like that's not on a diaper, young lady. So, and we're laughing all about this because you have to. There's no right way to raise children as long as they're loved and treated with respect, and also are able to feel like they can be their own person, of who they are, feel heard and seen and validated is really important. Divorce does not need to damage your children if it's done well and if it's done right. And again, those of you that know me know I'm not pro-divorce. If you can save your marriage, if you can go to therapy and counseling, please do. But if for any reason your marriage is on the rocks, please research it. Read my book, Better Divorce Blueprint. Reach out to me for coaching. If you're in the early research stages of this, you only get one shot at this. There's no dress rehearsal. So please make sure you do not look back at this with regret. You only have one shot. So make sure you do it wisely with grace and dignity and wisdom so that you can save money and stay out of court. So to those listening, thanks for coming on this journey with me in the Better Divorce podcast. And thanks again, Brynn. I appreciate your time, and reach out to her. You never know, you might have found your next career.